Hello everybody, recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples with episode number 47 of the Movement Debrief. And tonight, folks, this one's gonna be dope as all types of hell, fam. We're gonna talk about hamstrings. 101, 201, 301, all for fun. We're gonna talk about mental resiliency, how to become more resilient, how to become more clutch in high pressure situations. And last but not least, we're going to talk about ankle dorsiflexion. How do you restore that ankle mobility, fam? Stay tuned, I'll answer those questions as well as other questions asked from the people, answered by this people, for the people, fam, recognize fam. Quick housekeeping, September 15th and 16th in Seattle, Washington, Human Matrix is coming your way. I will link a link in the show notes so you can sign up. Also, folks, if you don't want to make it that far out west, I got another one coming in Kansas City, Kansas in October. Details to follow once I get things a little bit more ironed out. Other than that, let's debrief, shall we? First question comes from Gibby. Gibby asks, why are hamstrings purely anti-gravitational exhalers and polyarticular muscles that need to be trained correctly? The world needs to know. I have to think about that one a little bit. So what Gibby is asking is, what function do the hamstrings play in respiration? At least I think. It's kind of a tough one. And how do we train said hamstring muscles? I will give you the answer right now, folks. If only I had a model to show you guys what function the hamstrings play in respiration. Oh wait, I do. So the hamstrings attach right here. That's your ischial tuberosities for those listening audio only. And what we have to understand is what happens at these bones, the innominates, when you are breathing under normal respiratory mechanics. When I take a breath of air in, think about it this way. The thoracoabdominal pelvic cavity, how's that for a word, should do this. It should expand in all directions, not just 360, but also top, down, chrome spinning. It should expand upon inhalation and contract upon exhalation. So it's like this huge ball. Breathe in, everything expands, blow out, everything comes together right now over me. Now, what would happen then at these bad boys? Well, in order for me to get posterior thoracoabdominal pelvic cavity expansion, the sacrum has to counter-nutate. And you can't see that, but basically if this is my sacrum, it's going to tilt backwards. That way air can go in this way. That tilting backwards is going to allow the pelvic diaphragm to descend and take pressure from the guts, the goods, if you will. Now, if we understand sacroiliac mechanics, if I have a sacrum that is counter-nutating upon inhalation, these innominates should flex, adduct, and externally rotate. Or if you're looking from the side, anteriorly rotate, not tilt, rotate. This is a rotation of the innominate. That's what's happening. Now, you have to ask yourself, when Gibby says, why are the hamstrings purely anti-gravitational exhalers? Here's what's happening. The hamstrings function, or one of their actions, at the hemipelvis is to posteriorly rotate the innominate, because they're here, and if this is forward and I contract the hamstring, is going to posteriorly rotate the innominate, which is the exact opposite action that happens at the hemipelvis when you take a breath of air in. So when I inhale, it anteriorly rotates. When I exhale, it posteriorly rotates. The hamstrings can create that posterior rotation of the innominates. That's why they are an important muscle with a lot of the stuff we do from a respiration standpoint. What does it mean, though, to train them correctly? This is something where I don't know if I would have a contention point with this question, but I would have to dig further and say, correctly for what? Because the hamstrings just don't do that. They do a lot of different things. They extend the hip, they flex the knee, they do many other things. They're ligamentous muscle for the ACL. They prevent anterior tibial translation. Kind of a big deal if you got some knee issues. So what does it mean to train the hamstrings correctly? Depends on your goal. If my goal is to normalize respiratory mechanics, and I also want to maybe restore movement variability at a pelvis, then I'm probably going to want to do things that utilize the hamstrings to either take this anteriorly rotated innominate and posteriorly tilt it, or, how about this, guys? If I have a case where I have posterior rotation of both innominates, but because the spinal curves are so exaggerated, the whole pelvis tilts forward, I can also use the hamstrings in that case to pull this back to center, which may normalize the curves of the spine. Because you also have to look at another function that the hamstrings play through the sacrotuberous ligament, because they have an attachment at the sacrotuberous ligament. So if this is my ischial tuberosity. Sacrotuberous kind of runs from that ischial tuberosity up to the sacrum. Sacrum, tuberous, ischial tuberosity. If you look at anatomy textbooks, and I really don't think you'll be able to find it in an anatomy textbook, but the app Complete Anatomy can give you this view, which I'll link in the show notes. I can't link the picture because of that whole copyright bullshit. But what can happen, what a hamstring can also do indirectly through the sacrotuberous ligament, is pending the position of the sacrum, it can help mutate that bad boy. You have to look at the model. What I would do is, if you get an anatomy app, whether it's Complete Anatomy, which is what I like, or Visible Body, I've used that as well. Hook up the hamstrings, get the sacrotuberous ligament, turn it to the side, and you can see how the hamstring attachments via the sacrotuberous ligament to the sacrum would take a counter-nutated sacrum, which is what's going on in this case, and nutate that bad boy. That's another action that can happen from a variability standpoint in terms of how you can help someone who has an anterior rotation of an innominate, which would be a narrow infrasternal angle, or a posteriorly rotated innominate, but it's tipped forward. That would be a wide infrasternal angle. Either of those are viable ways to utilize hamstrings to help you restore movement variability. That's just the variability side of things. When we're talking about properly training the hamstrings, if we're on a power capacity train, different story. It depends on what you're trying to do. If we're trying to get the hamstring stronger, well, I'll tell you what, probably the best activity in a deadlift, folks, is probably sprinting. And you can look up a guy who knows way more about that than I, Derek Hansen, and I'll link his course review. But you can produce so much force through the lower extremity via sprinting. I think it's like 9 times body weight. Try lifting that, fam. You can't. Sprinting, big deal for the hamstrings. Other than that, use your typical stuff. You can do conventional deadlift, any deadlift variation, any RDL variation. I love glute ham raises. Let's not get it twisted. That trains the knee flexion component of those bad boys. Any single leg RDL. I mean, the possibilities are endless, but the more ways you can train the hamstrings that can lead to strength gains, the better. What if your goal is hypertrophy? If you have gained an appreciable amount of strength in some of the big lifts, I don't see any harm in doing some type of hamstring curl or something that targets specific actions of the hamstrings to make sure you get a maximal contraction. So really, to train these bad boys, it ultimately depends on what you are trying to accomplish. If it's better breathing, better variability, get them tilting the pelvis. If it's strength, power, sprint, lift, isolate, I don't care. Just make it happen. I agree with you, Jason. I'm going to quote this bad boy. A good friend of mine, Jay Burn Performance, the more love we show the hamstrings, the better. Hashtag hamstring lover all. Fam, recognize fam. I don't think I could have ended it better. Love your hamstrings. train them, use them to restore variability, help them get you powerful, build your capacity, you ought to be in business. Great question, Giddy. Next question. Kind of excited about this one. Next question comes from John. John asks, I have a decent idea of how PRI can be used to enhance physical performance. However, when it comes to its impact on mental performance, I have a lot of unanswered questions. I would love to hear your thoughts on utilizing PRI to influence the autonomic nervous system to improve decision-making and mental resiliency for those who have to make critical decisions in high-stress environments. Cops, firefighters, military personnel. By utilizing PRI concepts to influence resting vagus tone, is it plausible to think that we can improve our stress response in a high-stakes environment? This is a tough question. This is a really, really challenging question, but a great question, John. I'll give you the short answer. I don't know how much that stuff's going to help. Well, I think that working on any type of respiratory training, whether it's something PRI-based, something that DNS-based, something that I do, or anywhere in between, or even on the far outskirts of that stuff. If you read Sapolsky's book, he talks about, I'm talking about zebras, by the way, but he talks about how the respiratory cycle influences the autonomic nervous system. So exhalation is a bit more parasympathetic, inhalation more sympathetic. So in theory, could doing some type of breathing drill that emphasizes exhalation reduce or normalize, I don't want to say normalize, but drive autonomic tone more towards the parasympathetic side of things, or focus more on sympathetic withdrawal? Entirely possible. But I think things change big time when you're in a high stress environment. And especially if it's high stress, we're performing most of these interventions that we're talking about from a respiratory standpoint at a very low stress scenario. So to say that that's going to transfer to the event itself, I don't know if I buy. What it may be helpful in doing is helping you on the recovery side of things after the fact. But I don't think it's going to make you more chill in a high stress environment. So what is, Zach? I'm glad you asked. The biggest key to performing at a high level in a high stress environment is preparation and inoculating yourself to stress. Let me unpack that a little bit. A couple examples as a means to unpacking that. Think about our military. In the book Extreme Ownership, one of my favorites that I recommend to good friends, Jocko talks about a lot of situations where people were able to execute the task at hand because it was practiced over and over and over again until it became automatic. And that's really what you're trying to drive when you're in a high stress environment, especially in some of the cases that John mentioned, cops, firefighters. These individuals practice, if this happens, then this, to take the decision component out of it. Because when you are in a high stress environment, you can't think. Those higher brain centers are not as active because the sympathetic nervous system kicks up into high gear. You go more hindbrain because those portions or those responses help you perform at a high level. And I think if you can't get up that high into the stress response, you probably won't perform as good at a high level because production of force and many of the other things that is good from the stress response just doesn't happen. So it's not something that we want to dull down when shit's about to hit the fan. And I don't think that performing low-level activities is going to help you at high-level activities. That would be the same thing as saying a great strength and conditioning program is going to get you into the NBA. I don't know a single person who that worked for. Practicing basketball, and in that case, making sure you can hit the important shot in clutch situations is really the key to performing at a high level. It's practice, it's repetition, it's making responses automatic when you're under stress. Because if you can do that, then you really can perform at a high level under stress, and you don't need any of the ancillary stuff. To summarize, I think that respiratory-based stuff is going to be helpful from a recovery standpoint, but the best way that you can become a better performer in a high-stress environment is practice, 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 and especially practice in high-stress environments. So when you get to that point where you're stressed and you got to make a decision, you're not even making the decision. The decision is already made before you even make the move, and then you're winning. John, unbelievable question, man. That was fun. Last question comes from Joshua. Joshua asks, another clinically applicable question coming at you. Wu-Tang Clan coming at you. So I notice that many people lack ankle range of motion. Now granted, that this isn't coming from higher up in the chain. How would you approach increasing ankle range of motion? Specifically dorsiflexion, since stretching has little to no effect. Much appreciated as always. Joshua, I much appreciate your question. Let's answer that. First thing, granted this isn't coming from higher up in the chain. I would say most of the time, most ankle dorsiflexion limitations are coming from up higher in the chain. Think about this. If for whatever reason, respiratory demands are increased, I can have an individual who has shifted their weight a bit more forward via a multitude of ways. When we were talking about the hamstring side of things, this anterior rotation of the innominate is going to shift the body weight forward, which would make the gastrocs a bit more concentrically active, limiting dorsiflexion. The other case too, where I get the posteriorly rotated innominates, and then I tilt the pelvis anteriorly because of exaggerated curves, that too would lead to the same response. So I think that you have to address going up the chain first and foremost, and a lot of times that's going to clear up most dorsiflexion limitations. The way I do that, infrasternal angle, I can't beat that dead horse enough. I will link a bunch of ISA stuff in the show notes if you're just new to the movement debrief. Another thing that I think is very important and a great way to restore ankle range of motion and dorsiflexion, get your peeps squatting. And squatting in a way, at least early on, that emphasizes the respiratory component of things. I'm not talking like a back squat or anything like that, but I'm talking about a full squat where, like, say you're pooping in the woods, you gotta go poop. That's the kind of squat I want. One where you are getting pure flexion of the spine. You can go ask the grass and appreciate full dorsiflexion. Working those with various drills are money in the bank. Some of my favorites that I'll link in the show notes are a toe touch to squat. I think that's great. If you are a narrow infrasternal angle, if you're a wide infrasternal angle, I like a sink squat where you put your hands in the kitchen sink, walk all the way back, drive the knees forward. You'll be in business. A progression from that you can use is a counterweight squat. I've been using that quite a bit. Hold the weight out in front, so that way it helps you shift your weight back, work on depth, boom, squat city. I also did a gargantuan post back when I was doing a lot of the movement deep dives. I need to do one of those again one of these days. But back when I was doing the movement deep dives, I did a whole post on an exercise called the squatting bar reach. Well, I don't use that activity as much because I've just found that it works great in the clinic, but it's really hard to execute at home. So I haven't used that as much as I do the toe touch to squat, the sink squat, and the counterweight squat. But I still think it's a worthwhile drill to utilize. And if you watch that movement deep dive, it's going to give you an idea of the mechanics involved with ankle dorsiflexion. Those would be my go-to treatments for restoring ankle dorsiflexion. Address up the chain first. Now, I'll play with you a little bit, Joshua. Let's say you have done all that and you're still having a hard time restoring dorsiflexion. Maybe there was a surgical procedure involved. Maybe there was some type of acute injury involved to the ankle. I did a post many moons ago on how to treat ankle sprains. I'll link it in the show notes. But that post is pretty much, I don't think anything has really changed from the addressing, aside from maybe the addressing variability stuff, but the local inputs that I would normally do in those cases, I still do them to this day if I need to. I've just found that by working squat progressions and other exercise progressions where you're shooting the knee forward seems to be most impactful. But really what I do is several different manual therapy techniques that I've found to be helpful. When I was certified in ART, I used to do a lot of ART of the gastroc, sometimes doing ART to the anterior tib, which sounds a bit counterintuitive. Seems to work pretty well. I like doing a ton of joint manipulations. If there's one spot, peripheral joint, that I enjoy manipulating, or really any joint for that matter, because I don't do much spinal manipulation. Oh, I did pop a neck today. Oh. Feet and ankles seem to be one of those places where manipulation seems to work pretty well. Doing ankle distraction, doing any type of manipulation of the tibiofibular joints, proximal or distal, any posterior talar glides, doing a cluster of all of those things seems to be pretty helpful in restoring ankle dorsiflexion. Once you've done that, get them to the squat or get them to something where they have to shoot the knees forward. That's probably the biggest key. Is manual therapy or any one thing is not, any local treatment's not going to fix it alone. The motion that you've gained automatically has to be applied in a environment that the patient or the client can learn how to express and utilize that motion. But really, any manipulations work really well. Sometimes, if you work on neurodynamics also, that can have a profound impact on ankle range of motion. Maybe you got someone who suffered from an ankle sprain and you're maybe trying something where you're plantar flexion inversion, maybe they get that little pinch in the front. I'm sure sometimes you guys have seen that, but if they get a little pinch in the front, what may happen is not that how we would traditionally think where you're getting the anterior impingement of the ankle, but it could be that the nerve that runs right across the front of the ankle joint, which would be your distal fibular nerve, I believe. I'm gonna have to double check that. Man, I gotta review my anatomy. But the fibular nerve, whichever one, I believe it's distal. Sometimes that might be a little bit more sensitive. Doing neurodynamics where you're working plantar flexion inversion, doing some type of head flexion extension, that can work pretty slick in terms of restoring ankle range of motion. So those would be some of the things that I would look at to restore dorsiflexion. I couldn't tell you the last time I stretched ankle dorsiflexion. I think the best stretch is squatting, and then if you need some type of local input in the area to make a favorable change on ankle range of motion, do that, and then get them right back to squatting or something where they have to push that knee forward. I think if you do those things, make sure you address up the chain, because a lot of times it's involved. You ought to be in business. Now, in some cases, if it's a surgical procedure, understanding where the screws are can give you an idea of if you can get ankle dorsiflexion back. Because in some cases, depending on where the screws are, maybe if it's like through the ankle joint in the case of a fusion as an extreme example, or even sometimes with the repairs of a high ankle sprain, sometimes you might not get full ankle dorsiflexion range of motion back. And there's not a technique that you can do to make that happen. And the best thing you can do is teach compensatory strategies, continue to focus on trying to drive ankle dorsiflexion as best as you can so you get everything you can get. But understand that pathology changes things and it can change how we move. And a lot of times you might not be able to get exactly what you want. So to summarize, treat up the chain, even if you don't think it's up the chain. Apply local inputs so you can go back to movements that are up the chain. And last but not least, respect surgical procedures, because that can change how the ankle joint functions. And I think that's a good stopping point for us tonight. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Movement Debrief. If you want to learn more about this joker right here and you want more information about some of the stuff I talk about, go to zachcouples.com. what you want to do is sign up for my newsletter. You'll get access to a ton of free stuff, almost 3 hours worth of talks, almost 50 pages of notes, an acute to chronic workload calculator, and I'll email you every Friday some cool stuff that I've been coming across. Definitely hit me up there. Check out the online services if you want to do a movement consultation to help you move better because you're a little tight, or you are maybe hurting a little bit, you've tried some other things, don't know where else to go. Maybe improving your movement can help you with that. I can help you there. I also offer fitness training if you're trying to get jacked, if you're post-rehab, if you want to go with a fat loss program, you just want to move better, I can be your guy for that as well. Definitely check me up there. Also, I offer mentoring. If you want to learn the types of things that I talked about with you guys today and more, definitely hit me up on the mentorship program. That's the biggest spot you can go to get me. You can also sign up for the Zach Couples Show on iTunes, because guess what? There's 46 other debriefs. You might not want to see me for all of them, but you might want to bring me for a ride with you. Check me out there on iTunes or Stitcher. And then, of course, all my social media links are on my website. I'm on Facebook /ZCouples, Twitter @ZCouples, that Instagram, baby, Zach, Z-A-C, Couples, C-U-P-P-L-E-S, and then hit me up on YouTube. Just search Zach Couples. You'll find me, fam. I hope you guys keep loving life. Have a phenomenal rest of your week. Keep it real, but not to the extent where things go wrong. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and I'll see you next time. Deuces.